Okay, so we're diving into places for everyone in Oldham. And, you know, on the surface, it sounds simple enough, right? A plan for new homes, but as I'm sure you've guessed, it's gotten a bit, well, complicated, shall we say.
Yeah, it's gone way beyond just like bricks and mortar at this point. We're
Hmm.
talking accusations of like manipulated votes, unelected officials kind of pulling the strings, and a community that feels like their concerns are just being ignored.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're going to try to untangle today. You sent over a bunch of stuff, a council meeting recap from the Oldham Chronicle, this really fiery opinion piece. It's literally called Places for Everyone, The Death of Oldham's Democracy.
Hmm.
And even an interview with Andy Burnham himself trying to, well, kind of smooth things over.
Quite the collection. And you're right to be concerned about that democracy angle,
Yeah,
because when you have officials potentially blocking a council's vote, claiming it's unlawful to even send a letter, that raises some serious red
it
flags.
does. So before we get into all the drama, let's just take a step back. What is Places for Everyone at its core?
Right, so at face value, Places for Everyone, or PFE as we'll call it, is a plan spanning a decade, aiming to build 11,500 new homes across 9 boroughs in Greater Manchester by 2037. The goal, at least on paper, is to address the housing shortage, while also trying to preserve green spaces.
Right, and the Oldham Chronicle actually mentions that Oldham managed to negotiate down their green bud development from 7.5% to 2.5%. That sounds like a win, doesn't it?
It would seem so. But the article also highlights that even that 2.5% is a major sticking point for a lot of residents. For them, any greenbelt development is just unacceptable. It's like the symbolic line that once crossed opens the floodgates.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And that kind of leads us to the council meeting, where things got really interesting. The Chronicle called it a nail-biter of a vote, 30 to 29 in favor of withdrawing from PFE. So you'd think that settles it, right?
You would think so, but not quite. Here's where the procedural stuff gets a little messy. Oldham can't just say, we're out. They need to formally request withdrawal from the UK government. And this is where those accusations of undemocratic actions come in.
Right, because council officers are saying that sending that letter is actually unlawful. That's what the Chronicle reported in. It's also echoed in that Death of Democracy piece, which, let's be honest, doesn't mince words.
It does not, and that piece argues that this unlawful claim is just a power play. They say there's no legal precedent for blocking a council from even requesting withdrawal. It's like saying you can vote all you want, but we'll decide if it counts.
Which, as that piece points out, is a massive problem for democracy. It creates this feeling that the vote was basically pointless, that the real power lies with these unelected officials.
Exactly. And this isn't just some theoretical legal debate. It has real consequences for the people of Oldham. If they feel like their elected representatives are being silenced, why would they even bother voting at all?
Right. So we've got a plan that's dividing the community, a close vote that might be totally meaningless, and accusations of officials undermining democracy. Where do we even go from here?
Well, let's look closer at the arguments for and against PFE itself. Because while the procedural stuff is definitely concerning, we can't forget about the plan that's at the heart of it all. Let's start with Andy Burnham's perspective. In his interview, he argues that PFE actually gives Oldham more control over development, not less. His logic is that by being part of this larger plan, Oldham gets a seat at the table and can shape things to benefit the town.
But the Death of Democracy piece calls that a straight-up lie. They argue that PFE actually takes power away from local communities and hands it to developers. They're basically saying, is the developers calling the shots?
And they back that up with some pretty strong examples, like that claim about PFE protecting the Greenbelt more than going it alone.
Yeah, Burnham mentions that in the interview, right? He says that by concentrating development in specific zones, PFE actually safeguards the rest of the Greenbelt.
Right, but the Death of Democracy piece points out that those specific zones still include large areas of Greenbelt land. They say it's just a way to kind of sugarcoat the destruction of these important areas.
And they also take issue with Burnham's claim that being in PFE will bring investment to Oldham. They basically call it a bribe, with no guarantee that the money will actually benefit the people who live there.
Yeah, they're suggesting that even if there is some investment, it'll likely go towards these massive developments that mainly benefit developers, not the residents of Oldham.
So we've got Burnham painting this positive picture of PFE, while this Death of Democracy piece is saying it's all a facade, designed to help developers get rich at the expense of the community. Where does the truth lie?
It's probably somewhere in the middle, but the concerns raised in that opinion piece are definitely worth thinking about. especially when we consider the potential threat to democracy itself.
Right, and that's what's so striking about that piece. It's not just about housing or green spaces. It's about the erosion of democratic processes.
Exactly. They argue that the whole PFE process has been manipulated to silence opposition and force through a predetermined outcome. They point to the council officer's claim that a withdrawal letter would be unlawful. As evidence of this,
It's like they're saying we'll let you vote, but ultimately we decide what's allowed.
exactly, and that sets a dangerous precedent. Because if people start to believe that their votes don't matter, they'll stop participating in the system altogether.
So what does this mean for the average person living in Oldham? Are they just pawns in a game played by developers and unelected officials?
That's the central question of this whole situation, and it's one that everyone in Oldham needs to consider.
Yeah, the death of democracy piece raises some serious red flags. They're arguing that PFE isn't about meeting the housing needs of the community. It's about making developers richer and letting them build on Oldham's green spaces.
And they highlight that the housing calculations behind PFE are outdated and don't reflect the realities of life after the pandemic.
So essentially, they're saying the PFE is based on bad data and is being pushed through without really considering what the community actually needs.
Exactly, and that's why they're so worried about the threat to democracy.
They believe that PFE is a symptom of a much larger problem, the erosion of local control. Where unelected officials and powerful groups are increasingly calling the shots, while ordinary people are being ignored.
And that's a trend that should concern all of us, not just in Oldham, but in communities all over the country.
So what can people do? If the system is rigged against them, how can they fight back?
That's the challenge, isn't it? But giving up isn't an option.
Right. The death of democracy piece doesn't offer any easy solutions, but they urge people to stay informed, hold their elected officials accountable, and make their voices heard even when it's difficult. They're basically saying, don't just sit back and let this happen. Get involved, speak up, and fight for your community.
Exactly, because if we don't push back against these power grabs, they'll just become the new normal, and then we're all in trouble.
This whole PFE situation in Oldham really raises a bigger question, doesn't it? Is this just a one-off, or is local democracy under threat across the whole UK?
It's a question worth asking. I mean, if unelected officials can just ignore a council vote on something as big as this development plan, what's stopping them from doing it on other issues?
It's like a crack in the foundation.
Yeah.
And if we don't fix it, it's just going to keep spreading.
Right, and that death of democracy piece definitely suggests this is a pattern, not just a random event. They argue that we're seeing a shift in power away from our elected representatives and towards these unelected bureaucrats and special interest groups.
And if that's true, it's a pretty scary thought. Because when people lose faith in the system, when they feel like their voices don't matter, they become disillusioned and they disengage.
And that apathy is dangerous for any democracy. It creates this vacuum that can be exploited by people who don't actually care about the community.
So what can we do? What can anyone listening do to make sure their voice is heard and their community's needs are met?
First things first, stay informed. Pay attention to what's happening in your area. Go to those council meetings, read the local news, get involved with community groups. Knowledge is power, right? The more you know, the better you'll be able to hold those in power accountable.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to speak up. Contact your representatives, write letters to the editor, go to protests, use social media, make your voice heard.
And remember, you're not alone in this. There are tons of people out there who share your concerns. Find them, connect with them, build those coalitions, and work together to demand a system that actually represents you.
This deep dive into the Oldham Places for Everyone controversy has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's raised some serious questions about transparency and accountability and the future of local democracy itself. And this isn't just happening in Oldham. This is a fight that's going on in communities all across the UK. So we encourage you to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay vocal, because the future of your community really does depend on it.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011, he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
A very, very good evening. My name is Rajamir. This is a Recusant 9 transmission. Thank you very much for joining me earlier than what would normally be a 9 o'clock broadcast. I'm afraid I've been under the weather somewhat, so I don't think I'll last 9 o'clock this evening. I put out a broadcast, I put up a post on Facebook earlier on this week and said I'd share this transmission free to air. We got to 100 shares, or I think it was 50 coffees in total. We got over 100 shares, but we didn't really get over 100 shares because 40 or 50 people, 40 people I think, shared the posts a couple of times. So it was worth the effort, I think. And what I tried to do was try and promote it in such a way where it wasn't even contentious, really, the post I was asking people to share. And it was me testing whether it's worth continuing on Facebook or not. So I shared with you last week, I think those of you joined me last week, we're coming to the end of our journey on Facebook. For me, it's just not worth its while, I'm afraid. We do get lots of engagement. We still get lots of engagement. The figures are still in the tens of thousands, and at certain points when big stories break in the hundreds of thousands. But if people aren't willing to put themselves forward and share the content, then there's no point. So what I will be doing more rigidly than I have ever done before is transitioning to Patreon. You can join Patreon for free if you want to continue to see the sort of daily posts, and also via Redwall and the Rabble. What I just shared with you now was an AI generated podcast I've put up on Spotify. So what I'm doing, or what I'm trying to do, because I appreciate a lot of my content, written content in particular, is deep and it's complicated, and I'm trying to simplify. I don't try and make it complicated at all. Is by using an AI platform and inputting a whole host of data, they can essentially summarize a talk show for 10 minutes or so, and I know people find that of value. So go and find me on Spotify. You'll find the links on Patreon. You'll find the links on Redwall and the Rabble. And if you value it, then please let me know. And if you don't value it, let me know as well, because I'll stop doing it. Because each of the sort of podcasts probably take about 3 to 4 hours of me inputting data into this AI platform and then tweaking it and revisiting it several times before we get to a point where we can share something. So if you found value in it, let me know. How many of you watched it? By all means, put a message up, and we'll see. Whilst I say a few late hellos, how many of you listened to it? I think I should say. Hi, David. How are you? Nice to hear from you, mate. And thank you, Paul. I am better, much better than I was the other day. I think one of the other issues I've got is my daughter's been off ill as well. So I've not been getting much sleep in the evening, but I'm all right. I'm okay. So I'm glad you found a podcast of value. Right, what we've got this evening, because this transmission has gone out free to air, and again I'm trying a few things out just to see how we proceed. So first and foremost, Facebook is coming to an end. I think we'll use the stories, sort of short video anecdotes and stuff like that on it, but the actual informing content isn't going to be there. So we'll use the odd, is it Reels? Facebook Reels would use, and we'll use just links promoting, advertising what we're doing. I think is all Facebook will be useful. And I'm sorry about that, but you've all seen what's what's took place there. So it's not something I'm particularly happy about, because Facebook was the one platform where we began, for most of you, we began this journey together. And we fought very hard to remain on Facebook. If you remember, the council tried to take us off Facebook. Councillors, politicians, almost, have been arrested multiple times for Facebook posts that had nothing wrong with them, as proven in the courts, and the ones that actually, there were ones that didn't even reach the courts. I was arrested long before the summer riots and the summer attacks on our civil liberties that the rest of the nation are waking up to. I was arrested for incitements of rape because I'd used the word saw in a sentence. Nothing to do with rape, and there was no way in any way the article, the post I'd written could have anything to do with rape, never mind inciting rape. But the word saw resulted in, I think it was 4 police officers dawn raiding my house and falsely arresting me. So we've been on a journey on Facebook, but I'm afraid we're going to go our separate ways, I think. So if you find value in this work, you need to at the very least sign up to Patreon and sign up on the free platform. And those of you who are on Patreon, and I know a lot of you didn't want to download the app, but you can see the written content is presented a lot clearer. I can integrate videos and photographs far more effectively. And as a platform, as a creator, someone who writes and pulls content together, it's just an easier platform for me to operate from. So there is a free membership tier on that, and you'll get your daily posts on that. You can also pay £1 a month if you want to access all the content I share on there. But I leave that to you. Another test for today was, because this has gone out free to air, there's some super chat target there we've got pinned at the top, I think. And just to see, encourage really those of you who are here who don't subscribe or have a paid subscription of any form to request that you support the work. Because if you don't support the work and it continues like this form of me working and trying to encourage and support people, it comes to an end, I'm afraid. It's just not financially viable at all anymore. And we're coming to the end of a year. I've got to, like many of you, I've got to do my tax returns. I do them over, try and do get all the paperwork organised before Christmas, and then in January I send the paperwork back, and it's just not, I'd clear twice as much working in a warehouse with none of the risks attached with the work. So there's a tab at the top, I think, for super chats to the target, and let's see where we end up. And this isn't for the regular supporters to buy me super chats or anything like that. I'm really looking for those who take value from this but aren't financially contributing, and I don't believe that 75 pence a week is something that the vast majority of you cannot afford. My focus the last week or so, I produced another report. It went out. You'll have all seen it who opened the emails, on actually ripping to pieces the council's response to a vote that Arud Shah and her mates lost. And I want to focus this transmission exclusively on that. It's caused Andy Burnham some angst, but before we get to Andy Burnham and the angst we've caused him, I want to show you, confirm with you, how not just I, but the mainstream media, the council-funded mainstream media, saw the outcome of the vote. This is just a couple of days after that the council meeting was on the 6th, and this was published on the 8th in the Oldham Times by Kent Lawler. News reporter. Request to move Oldham from places for everyone scheme to be made. The council, here it is, you can see it. The council must request the government for Oldham to be removed from a major Greater Manchester housing plan after an extremely tight vote at a council meeting. There you go. The council must request the government for Oldham to be removed from a major Greater Manchester housing plan after an extremely tight vote at a council meeting. On Wednesday, November the 6th, the full council met and discussed the motion of revoking the borough from the Places for Everyone (PFE) plan. The PFE scheme, first proposed in 2016, would see thousands of new homes built across 9 of the city region's 10 boroughs over the next decade. Stockport withdrew from the plans back in December 2020. The plan is set to define a new green belt boundary for Greater Manchester amid a nationwide undersupply in housing, and has proved controversial. Many in Oldham feel that it would lead to the destruction of the green belt. But now, the council will have to formally request the government to remove the borough from the scheme. During the meeting, a motion was put forward to make the formal request for Oldham to be revoked from PFE. Addressing the meeting, Councillor Elaine Taylor, Cabinet Member for Decent Homes, said withdrawing from PFE would increase Oldham's housing target from 680 to 1,049 new homes per year as a result of the government's new housing targets. Councillor Taylor added, I do understand that people feel strongly about releasing Greenbelt land for development purposes, but if our housing numbers were to increase, we would have no option but to significantly expand the amount of Greenbelt land for development purposes. She added that Stockport has seen its annual housing targets nearly double, and it has conceded that Greenbelt land will need to be given up to meet the targets. Councillor Taylor said asking the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, to remove Oldham from PFE would not be legally sound and would leave the council susceptible to judicial review. Leader of the council, Councillor Arud Shah, added that leaving PFE would lead to more building in places we don't want in the borough. Councillor Howard Sykes, leader of Oldham Liberal Democrats, which proposed the motion earlier this year, said, the report argues that to write a letter to the Secretary of State would be unlawful. Members should ask themselves, how can it be that making a request of a government minister should be considered unlawful? Because the report fails to tell us how. No legislation or legal precedent is cited. So let's be really clear, without a proper legal explanation as to how and why it would be unlawful to write to the Secretary of State, the resolutions in this report amount to nothing more than an attempt to unduly influence elected members. Councillors voted in favour of making the formal request to the government by a majority of 30 to 29. Following the meeting, Councillor Sykes said Liberal Democrats have been against the destruction of our green belt in pursuit of developer profit from day one. When Labour lost control of the council earlier this year, we promised the people of Oldham we would force another vote on this issue and lead the charge to pull out of this scheme in favour of a brownfield first strategy for truly affordable housing. That is what we have done. In response, a council spokesperson said, "Places for everyone is Greater Manchester's plan to ensure the right homes are being developed in the right places across the city region while safeguarding our valuable green spaces. However, the reality is that the level of housing need in Greater Manchester means there will inevitably be some limited encroachment onto our green belt. In Oldham, we successfully reduced this from 7.5% of our green belt to just 2.5% by maximising use of brownfield availability in the borough. Leaving PFE would be incredibly risky course of action for Oldham because it means our greenbelt land and other green spaces would no longer benefit from the protection that PFE provides, making it easier for developers to build on them. Therefore, officers recommended that we didn't write to the Prime Minister to ask her to consider a request to withdraw from PFE. At Wednesday night's full council meeting, this recommendation was rejected, and we are now considering next steps." Just give me 1 second. That should reset that, yes, okay. Okay. First of all, in this article in the Oldham Times, the request to remove everyone from the Places for Everyone scheme. 4 times the article references that the vote meant that OMBC write to the government. Four times. And anyone who watched that council meeting will have seen for themselves exactly what they were voting for. Before I go on to a subsequent article, I want to debunk some of the double talk, lies, deception, whatever the term is you prefer to use. The first one is Elaine Taylor. Claims that withdrawing from Places for Everyone would increase targets from 680 homes to 1,049 homes. The government does have new targets. Now, if the government has new targets, and it's a new Labour government, by the way, because of its new housing targets, Places for Everyone would have to adopt those and incorporate the government's new targets. There is nothing legally, there is nothing that would mean that staying in Places for Everyone means that the government's quota for house building targets that Oldham is exempt from. Now, she doesn't say that, but that's what she's insinuating, isn't she? Councillor Elaine Taylor, Cabinet Member for Decent Homes, said withdrawing from PFE would increase Oldham's housing targets from 680 to 1,049 homes per year as a result of the government's new housing targets. Well, actually, staying in PFE would also increase housing targets from 680 to 1,049 new homes per year as a result of the government's new housing targets. These people think they're smart, and this is the sort of doublespeak they use. Two, but if our housing numbers were to increase, we would have no option but to significantly expand the amount of green belt for development. Again, complete nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense. And it's complete and utter nonsense because if you read what Howard Sykes later says, and I'll take it to the section. When Labour lost control of the council earlier this year, we promised the people of Oldham we would force another vote on this issue and lead the charge to pull out of this scheme in favour of a brownfield first strategy for truly affordable housing. So there's absolutely no need for us to build on the green belt in any case when we've got so much brownfield land. And if our housing targets increase, which is set by government, not something we can escape, adopting an exclusive brownfield first scheme would mitigate any building on the green belt. It's the green belt, for crying out loud. There's a line in the sand. There's a reason why they designated green belt. You can't dip into it when it suits you. And why are we dipping into it? Are we dipping into it to buy people from Holt's or Durker or Chadderton, support them into housing? No. It's to create an elite, exclusive, high council tax yielding income. It's got nothing to do with local housing targets. Never has done, never will do. Her next one . Stockport has seen its annual housing targets nearly double and it has conceded that greenbelt land will need to be given up. Okay. Stockport has seen its annual housing targets nearly double because Stockport did a review of what its housing targets need to be for the people of Stockport. And Stockport's review determined that they needed more houses, smaller houses, whatever, more houses to meet the local need. Not houses with big gardens at the front, big gardens at the back or anything like that. More houses for starter families, more houses for people who are retired and want to downsize. It needs more houses than what Burnham's scheme originally wanted of Stockport. So what that is actually is an admission that P4, the PFE scheme in Stockport, was never going to meet the needs of Stockport. It's a good thing that they're building houses now of the type, the size and the value in the places that best meet the needs of the people of Stockport. How can this be a bad thing, Elaine Taylor? And as for your claim, it has conceded that Greenbelt land will need to be given up. Notice again how Elaine Taylor dodges the facts, infers. Well, Stockport was giving up Greenbelt space anyway for places for everyone. Is it giving up more Greenbelt space? Less Greenbelt space? And if it's giving up Greenbelt space, is it in the Greenbelt areas that the people of Stockport think that houses should be built on? Do you see the difference? Do you see how they twist and manipulate and people just accept it? I'll carry on. She claims it's not legally sound. What we found out, as in to write a letter, is not legally sound. And susceptible. Who is going to do a judicial review? Susceptible to judicial review. It'll be laughed at. A council writes a letter to the government and someone is spending tens of thousands of pounds reviewing the writing of that letter. Who would it be? The only person it could be is Andy Burnham. The only person who could do that is the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. There's no way they'd do that. And if they did, they wouldn't win. And Burnham would be laughed at for the rest of his political career. More so than he is now. Sorry, the Oldham Times page is doing playing games. And I agree with Councillor Howard Sykes. Members should ask themselves, how can it be that making a request to a government minister could be considered unlawful? Okay. So that's what came out immediately after they got themselves into a mess and all their plans unravelled. A few days later, in the Oldham Evening Chronicle, and I don't blame the Chronicle for this, by the way, it's just it's how it's published, the local democracy reporter, Charlotte Hall, another one of the metropolitan elite, began to try and spin a counter narrative. But in a narrow defeat of 30-29, apparently we rejected the report. Well, the report wasn't rejected in isolation because the report forms one phase, one step of a motion that goes back to July. Councillor Sykes suggested that by rejecting the report, opposition leaders have forced the hand of senior leadership. He didn't suggest that at all. He stated that unequivocally. However, the Local Democracy Reporting Service understands that because of the double negative in the report, the council is not mandated to do anything, as the vote has only rejected the suggestion not to write to the Secretary of State. That's complete and utter nonsense. A separate motion requesting the letter to be written will have to be voted on in full council, according to a council spokesperson. Well, Charlotte Hall, who is this council spokesperson that is undermining democracy in Oldham? Because that council spokesperson would not have the authority to speak without, forget Arud Shah for one moment, without Shelley Kipling's approval, without Bogotov's approval. Do you see how bent this system gets? Who is your council spokesman? Drawn up over almost a decade of negotiations. I don't care. You could speak. You could have negotiate. You didn't negotiate with the people of the town. You negotiated amongst yourselves what you'd be doing to us. The PFE framework requires the borough to build 11,500 homes by 2037. Oldham, along with the rest of the country, is locked in a housing crisis. No, we're locked in a housing crisis isn't quite accurate, is it? There's far more going on in Oldham. Rents are rising more rapidly in the district than anywhere else in Greater Manchester. Maybe rents are rising more rapidly than anywhere else in Greater Manchester because rents were lower than anywhere else in Greater Manchester before. A council spokesperson argued, well, who's a council spokesperson? Sacrificing a little bit to protect the rest may be unpalatable to some members, but doing away with that condition is actually putting the whole green belt at risk. It doesn't make any sense. That's a complete lie, Elaine Taylor. That's a complete and utter lie. They are peddling the myth that if we don't sign up to places for everyone, then all of the green belt is open to development. No, because it's green belt. You can just say no to having houses built on the green belt, particularly if you have a local plan. Why has Oldham not developed its own plan? The next full council meeting when a motion to reject the PFE scheme could be put forward will be on December the 18th. Again, that's a complete and utter lie from an inexperienced, inept, fake liberal. And yes, if you hear contempt in my voice, it's because I actually hold these young women in complete contempt. The likes of Charlotte Hall have never lived in Oldham, will never live in Oldham, and they look upon our people with complete and utter disdain. So they think they can change democracy, which is why I produced a report. And this is the report I produced, and I shared it. I don't know how many of you read it or skimmed over it. And don't worry, I won't go for it now. It's in there for you to read. But I wanted to show you how much effort goes into this work. I called it the death of Oldham's democracy. Because when the councillors we elect vote on something and then unelected officials, unnamed spokespeople, hiding behind local democracy reporters that with their tongues wedged between Burnham's butt cheeks, such as Charlotte Hall, or want to have a tongue wedged between his butt cheeks, perhaps I should say. No one is fighting back. So this is my statement on it. Democracy does not die with Democracy does not die with dramatic coups. Democracy dies in council chambers through bureaucratic procedures behind official reports backed up by so-called journalists from the establishment media. Right now, in Oldham, it's dying through a planning framework called Places for Everyone. This isn't just another planning dispute, it's a battle for who controls our communities. I can do reports. There's an executive summary. The implications are chilling. I'll just read a paragraph out. The implications are chilling. If officials can block a simple letter today, what democratic rights will they declare illegal tomorrow? If they can demand endless revotes until they get their way, what's the point of voting at all? First, the pattern is clear. First, they declare normal democratic functions unlawful, then they force repeated votes until resistance breaks. Finally, they wait out opposition through procedural warfare. Got my signature, I forgot to take the thing out. So there's an introduction, there's a main analysis. You know what? I'll share it with you. Here's a presentation I put together. But before we get to the presentation, I want you to listen to what Andy Burnham had to say. If you're finding value in this broadcast, please like, please share. If you're not a paid subscriber, please consider a super chat. No one's bought me one today yet, or buy me a coffee, and I'll have a look and tell you how many have bought me a coffee. Whilst you listen to Burnham. Oh, sign in to confirm I'm not a bot. Just give me a second. So it's not letting me go that way. Let me try a different way. Do ask me any questions of what, whilst I'm fixing this, do ask me any questions of the articles we've gone through so far, please. Write it up in your comments, and I'll try and answer them whilst I'm trying to solve this at my end.
Very quickly before I move on, you have a situation actually in Oldham. I don't know what your thoughts are on this. The the housing plan Places for Everyone. Oldham Council are now saying that they want to pull out of this. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there was a vote recently, a very close vote in the council, Mike. It's this is at the end of a very long process, and I'm not sure legally what the avenues are available to the council. Obviously, people obviously respect the democratic vote, but this is really far advanced now, and it's not as easy as just saying pull out, because Oldham would have to have a local plan, and that has to be in place. And Stockport, which pulled out, found that it needed to release more greenbelt, or certainly had less protection for some of the greenbelt sites that it's got as a result of being outside of Places for Everyone. So it's not as easy as it may seem. This has been a long road with plenty of consultation. Personally, I think it's in Oldham's interest to stay in the plan, because obviously with the focus coming now with new investment, that is the best way to get that investment when there's allocated sites for regeneration. It actually means the Greenbelt in Oldham is more strongly protected, where it is now outside of those allocations. If you remove yourselves from the plan, all of a sudden the Greenbelt across the borough is open to more speculative development, and that's certainly, there's been issues in that regard in Stockport that came out of the plan. So it's always going to be challenging, Mike, isn't it, to decide how to handle planning issues. They're never going to be easy, but I don't think politics should be played with this at the end of the process. I think the time is now to get behind the plan and bring the investment into Oldham, because that is what this does now. It brings investment into Oldham.
This powerful heater can heat up any room in seconds with...
I don't think we need an advert about a powerful heater. End of a process. Not sure what the avenues are legally. That means you're not sure if you have any avenues through which to block this legally. Legally works two ways. I know you and your mates in Greater Manchester Police are bent, Andy Burnham, and try and, have been involved in Operation Hexagon. But here, the end of a process, not sure what the avenues are legally, means you're not sure if you can block us legally. Not whether what we're trying to do is unlawful, because it comes down to this. People respect the democratic vote. But, no, there's no but, is there, Chris? But he wants to put a but in. Oldham would have to have a local plan. I think that's what we've been... Does he think we're stupid? Does this chancer think we're stupid? Of course we want a local plan. Howard Sykes has specified what lies at the heart of that local plan. 1. Brownfield first, yeah? We build on every bit of brownfield we can first. 2. That the houses we build are affordable. 3. That the houses we build meet the needs of the people we have who live here. 4. That the houses we build for the people we need to build for is accompanied by the infrastructure we need. Schools, doctors, dentists. None of those foundations are difficult to understand, Andy Burnham. We understand them because we've been building houses in this town long before you came along, lad. So Oldham should have its local plan, and it won't take decades to produce. That local plan can be produced and ready to go out to consultation in under 3 months. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Obviously, we'd have to remove the council officers, the unnamed council officers, who will try to obstruct it and derail it, and bring in an independent consultancy firm to lead on it. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Like the second Brexit vote, because the first vote didn't go according to how these people wanted it to go to. And I speak as a person who voted to remain. But I understand a democratic mandate. If you lose the vote, you lose the vote. You don't find small print or get lawyers to say, oh, this word might mean something else. Everyone in that council chamber knew what they were voting for. Or against. He raises Stockport. Again, he talks about Greenbelt. Look, he's talking nonsense. If Stockport need to build 50,000 houses where before they needed to build 25,000 houses, that's not a bad thing. That's because Stockport have produced a local plan according to their local need, and that local need said we need to build 50,000 houses. But we need to build 50,000 houses that are affordable, that meet the needs of our people and are built in the places we need them to build on. And this belief that there are queues of developers lining up to come into Oldham, across Oldham, and steal our green belt, well, that's why we have a planning committee. And that planning committee's responsibility, once we have a local plan, is to say to these developers, no, building on the green belt is contrary to our local plan. Our local plan has clearly identified these sites for these types of houses. You want to play ball in Oldham? This is what you'll build. You can still make your profit. Or bugger off. Oh, they might take us to court. No. What they actually mean is certain officials and politicians might not get their, I've not got one to hand, a certain coloured envelope. Isn't that right, Bogatoff? What did I give you? Kipling? Cakes? Burnham tries to scaremonger and says green belt across the borough, more of it's at risk. And politics should not be played. Well, what are you doing? The vote is political. The council chamber is political. Politics should not be played. The only time you've now said politics should not be played because you're no longer in control of the town hall where the politics are played. For the last 30 years, the Labour Council that's controlled Oldham almost exclusively my entire lifetime. 50 years. Almost exclusively. They're quite happy to play politics because they control the politics. And now, as a direct consequence of the campaigning we've undertaken, they no longer control the council chamber in the way they did. And even if they do control opposition councillors, those opposition councillors, as we found out 2 weeks ago, can be put under so much pressure that they buckle. But what I want to take offence with, that Burnham says more than anything else, what I take offence with, is his claim it's in Oldham's interest and it'll bring investment into the town. Arud Shah gave a speech along with a regeneration leaflets that she handed out at the last council meeting. She talked about investment. Do you know what Burnham's plans for Oldham are and the investment they talk about? One, of course, they want to build on the green belt or around the green belt in those rural or semi-rural areas because it will attract a commuter belt. It will create a new commuter belt into Manchester. Like they have in Hale and places like that. It will create a new commuter belt this way. Rochdale, Oldham this way. It's nice up here, isn't it? Greenfield, Upper Mill, Dobcross, Delph, Denshaw, Diggle. So, bits of Shaw. So parts of Shaw, In fact, a friend of mine took me on a walk a couple of years ago around bits of shore I'd never seen before. I'd say it was nicer than parts of Saddleworth, if I'm honest with you. Thank you for trying, Charles. I'm not sure what's wrong with it not working, because I know my Buy Me a Coffee site does work, so I'm not sure what the issue was. And PayPal also does work. So they want this high income commuter belt, you know, for the posh boys and girls that work in Manchester at the combined authority or in other local authorities. 1. 2, those houses will pay high council tax, which will give the council lots of new income. It's the third most sinister reason, and Arud Shah lauded it at the last council meeting. Burnham's entire regeneration schemes across Greater Manchester includes, just give me a second, so I need to read this so I've got it right. Burnham wants Oldham in the plan because it is integral to the minimum wage warehousing complexes he wants to build along the M62 Northeast Corridor, what he calls the Northern Gateway. Okay, so they're building a whole host of warehouse complexes. Arud Shah was, you know, celebrating one around Hollingwood or somewhere recently. What they want the people of Oldham to be is, again, that new tier of factory workers, mill workers, working in warehouses. They need a new poverty class, a new working class, a new poor working class with no aspiration at the bottom, and they want us to service them. That's exactly what they want. Thank you, Charles. I don't know why PayPal worked and Buy Me a Coffee didn't. Yes, Nikki. So we get the crap jobs, and they import in the people who can afford the. I was in Diggle. On that scarecrow walk thing just before Halloween. My daughter and I go every year. They're building houses. I can't afford those houses. I couldn't afford those houses, but how many can afford 600,000, 700,000 pounds, 800,000 pounds? Who can afford those sorts of houses? No, they want us entrapped to provide them with the labour, the cheap minimum wage labour they need. And remember, this goes all the way back to James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon, who spoke about, advertised Oldham as a low-wage town, encouraging businesses who want to exploit low-wage labour to come and invest in the town. So no, that's what is taking place there. Yeah, that's exactly what he did. He celebrated it. He didn't just advertise it. I read it. He celebrated it. Okay, this is a presentation I put together that accompanies that report. I'll share this presentation again on Patreon and try and email it out via Redwall, and the Rabble has a series of slides. Places for everyone, the death of Oldham's democracy. Welcome to Oldham, a town where writing letters became unlawful and votes no longer count. Now I'm pleased with this. I spent some time doing this, so I'm not going to write on it. So, there's some nice diagrams. I'll talk you through. How democratic rights disappear. There are two unprecedented threats in Oldham. The claim in writing a letter is unlawful. So communicating our aspirations is unlawful. And somehow, when they don't like the votes, they make us vote again and vote again and vote again. So you can see what I consider to be low threats and high threats, and low control and high control. So there's a diagram there. I'm sure those of you will want to, and by all means use this to the politicians who are here. It'll be made freely available along with the report that's already been made freely available. Use it. So Stockport voted to maintain local control and democracy, and Oldham is in crisis because it addresses the challenge to democratic processes. Letters deemed unlawful, revotes demanded, democracy undermined by unnamed public officials. In Oldham, we did follow the proper process. There's a clear mandate and the voice of the people was heard. However, the council, that's the officer class, and Arud Shah's involved in this, make no mistake about this whatsoever, and Elaine Taylor, because they've been humiliated. Because they all get paid, don't they? Arud Shah gets paid a bonus for being a lead somewhere, Andy Burnham. It's all incestuous, it's all linked. And I believe this is a new threat to democracy. The aim is to weaponize process and exhaust democracy. And what happens in a town like ours is more and more people opt out of voting because voting doesn't matter, which is ultimately what these people want. Yeah, it was McMahon and Captain Underpants who were lauding the Fox Denton development. You're right, Tony. I mean, power seized by officials. Who is the Local Democracy Reporting Service's unnamed council spokesman? How can the council issue statements like that? It should be against council rules. If a council is issuing a statement of this gravity into the public domain, then an officer's name needs to be attached to it. So the double standards. When they win, one vote is sufficient. There's quick implementation, there's no legal questions, and democracy works. When they lose, multiple votes are required, the implementation is blocked, legal barriers created, and democracy becomes complicated. It's a power grab by unelected bureaucrats. And the Labour Party, our Rouges, we look beyond the likes of those idiots, Shah and the Pakistanis, and the Labour Party careerists. Look beyond them. There are councillors there who should be concerned because one day it'll come back to bite them, even when they are in power. In fact, I remember Labour Party council leaders in this town telling me how the officer class were a law unto themselves and they needed to be reined in. The end of this process is that this is a democracy in name only, with democracy becoming a theatre. Well, we've seen that theatre. And what's taking place in Oldham is not just an issue for Oldham, it's a national crisis. It's about the erosion of rights. It's a loss of local control. It's about disempowering communities, voter disenfranchisement, and a future governance at risk. I'm not over-egging this. I genuinely believe when things like this happen and they get away with it, an entire generation, an entire demographics of people opt out of democracy. And it's not healthy. If votes don't count, why hold them? If letters are unlawful, how do we communicate? If process trumps democracy, who really governs? If officials can force revotes, what's left of local control? Who gave officials veto powers over democracy? When did protest become more important than votes? How did administrators gain control over elected members? Where did this power grab end? And I pull out of this what I call three critical truths. One, that no democratic right is safe, no vote is final, and no community is immune. Democracy is at risk everywhere as a consequence of this, and immediate actions need to be taken. There is a path to recover. One is they've got to honour the vote. There's no statement from Arud Shah. There's no statement from Howard Sykes, from Graham Sheldon. But separate to that, structural changes are needed so that the officer party are put in their place, and certain rules come into place, a paper produced to confirm what they can and cannot do. Their job isn't to govern. Their job is to do what those who govern tell them to do. That's how a democracy works. And the choice before us? We either accept a controlled future, or we fight for our democracy. We either choose between control or fight for democratic freedom. It's one or the other. Without real local powers, authorities become servants of central government rather than their local communities. And I can't find the quote. I'm certain I heard Lord Heseltine say words to those effects not long after the riots in the 80s when Thatcher sent him out to places like Toxteth. Now listen. This is what needs to happen. And I'll share the I'll share the PDFs of the presentation and the report again, and I'll email it to the Howard Sykes and Sheldon and so on. But this is what needs to happen. If the Labour Party, if we are not robust in defending our democracy and protecting our rights, and I get called out for it all the time, as though I'm some aggressive such and such, but I'm not aggressive or anything. I'm robust. What they want is for it to go away until December. By that time, do something with Mincy Boy. Maybe try and bribe the Oldham group with the Pakistani Community Centre in Glodwick. Have a second vote and win it. What needs to happen is that Howard Sykes needs to stand up. Mark Woodvine needs to stand up because it was Woodvine who seconded the original motion. And they need to write to the borough solicitor. No, sorry. They need to write to the mayor, copying in the borough solicitor, calling another extraordinary council meeting on this issue. They need to fight that the vote was final and not go with a second motion in December. And the only way they can fight for that is to call an extraordinary council meeting in the same way Lewis Quigg did over the dodgy appointment of, what's her name, Shelley Kipling, and Harry Caffrell being paid £40,000 a year to technically work 1 day a week in Oldham. Howard Sykes should have done it already. Max Woodbine should have done it already. Howard knows better. Max, he's a young lad, he won't know. Graham Sheldon, you've got no chance. He's not, he's risk adverse, isn't he? You've seen him. But Howard Sykes and the Lib Dems need to write to the mayor requesting an extraordinary council meeting. They need to fulfill the criteria to do that, which is, I think, 5 people writing to him. They've got more than 5 councillors between them and the Conservatives. They've got close to 20. And request an extraordinary council meeting. And if they don't, then I question whether this is just about playing politics. Because I know for you and for me it isn't. These are our homes, these are our communities. These are the places where we raise our children. These are the places where we bury those we love. This is our home. So to us, this is not about playing politics. Howard Sykes, write to the mayor, call an extraordinary council meeting. And I guarantee you that public gallery will be full of Greenbelt campaigners from Shaw, from Royton, from Lees, from across Saddleworth, from Chadderton, from across all communities in this borough, who can see what's going on, and also people who perhaps don't have an interest in the Greenbelt but have an interest in protecting our democracy. My name is Roger Mir. This is one of those free-to-air Recusant 9 transmissions. I hope there are those listening who can and will act on this. I have no power, I'm not a politician. I don't sit in the council chamber. What I can do is educate members of the public from outside and lobby politicians and encourage them and provide them with the resources they perhaps might otherwise not have in terms of expertise. The hope was that we get so many super chats. We did not get a single one, and I want to go through this with you because I didn't want to share this with you until we got to the end. And the hope also was to see how the coffees come in. I think we got 4 or 5. So for me, that's it for now. The entirety of my output will now be going behind Patreon. It'll be going behind Redwall and the Rabble. The free content you'll find on Patreon and on Redwall and the Rabble, where you can just, you'll get an email or the odd article and things I'll put up. But everything else now goes behind a paywall, and I'm pretty much done for now. Enjoy your evening. Good night.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011, he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.